Hey, welcome back to another video. My name is Isaac, and today we're going to be running over the hip file of this setup here that I tweeted about a little bit ago, and it explains kind of the auto level of detail that is happening on this photo scan, or in this case on a 3D photo scan with textures that has already been done and exported out of something like reality capture. This method goes and uses Alice Visions, also known as Meshroom, and it is heavily reliant on SideFX Labs and all of the tools that come along with that. So to use this, you'll definitely have to have that installed. And without further ado, we can jump right into Houdini. We're going to be covering this photo scan auto level of detail hip file and the different ways you can use it, and hopefully explain kind of the notes that are left inside this if there's any confusion there. So when you open this file, the first thing you'll see is that you are in the object level here, and the first thing I kind of color code them that you can start in green, obviously here in the build level of detail 000, so that's the highest res version, and then it gets broken out from 0 all the way up until 4 being your lowest res version, with the tri versions and also the quad versions. And then the red color will obviously be the last in this traffic light coloring system. This is where you'll go in and you'll click exports and put your different file paths to where you want this to go, and that will be the end of the system. So if we jump in here, everything has a warning, and that is for good reason, because it has no file to go to. This is built as a two-part system depending on which way you want to use it. It is capable of going directly from photo scanned sources. So if you have just photos that you want to run through the Alice Vision photogrammetry node, that is the SideFX Labs. So the first part is that you could start up here, and the note says that you can just add any of your photos right into here where click add images. TIFFs I have found work best, but you can technically load any type of image. I think TIFFs work best. There are a myriad of tutorials that cover much more in depth all the settings in here. You can kind of go into that if you want to use this method. The next part here is there's a note about this box. This box is what you can use in your scene to help define a masked area after you've done your scan, and that will go into a group that tells Houdini and the system which parts to keep, very standard things, and then there's some cleanup after that. After you go down here, I'm not showing because the process for this photo scan is actually I found to be normally between 20 minutes to an hour, and it's, you know, about a good 30 seconds to a minute to cook between some things if it's not cached out or froze at the top. So that's why we're just gonna lightly cover over this. It goes through, uses the SideFX Lab, another node here, to recenter to world origin. And then after that, if there's any holes in your scan, you can use the bounding box to do a Boolean operation for intersection to easily close all those holes. And then you are left with your out photo scan null that will go into the switch. And this switch right here just notes that this is how you will be picking between which method you want to go with. Much easier here for the 3D object method. I'm going to load in this strudel scan that was given to me by Patrick Laterno. He did a very detailed scan here, we can see, of this very nice strudel. We can also look at different textures for this. So this node just tells you that you can use the lab's quick material to load in any maps that your scan is coming in with. This is an important detail for all the other map baking that happens in the other level of details. So it is best if you are not using the photo scan method, which will generate those texture maps just on its own. If you're bringing in a model, definitely remember to bring in any of its texture maps so that those can be baked down again later down the line. So if we go here and we just add these, we can go into text. So we want to run that into the diffuse. And then for normal, sometimes it does get bogged down. You found that sometimes this is due to the Labs PBR shader, but if you switch over to Principled, switch back to Labs, you can see that it works now. So it's a bug that I found a couple times that I've run into, The only reason for using PBR is that the normals I find don't show up as well in just the standard. It's a little crunchier than in Labs. PBR seems to just show up a little bit better in the viewport, but I've not noticed any big difference on the actual export and when we bring this into another 3D application. So that's something to note. After that, it just goes right into a straighten node outside of this, which will just try to do its best to align this. It's another Labs node. You can obviously manually tweak this, but this is just a good auto way of aligning. This obviously goes into the switch node, which you can pick. After that, there's a little bit of cleanup here and size correction. This node here from Labs will recenter your scan into the middle of the scene. And I know for this one, it happened to be 100th of the scale. So this is, if you watch the numbers on the grid, it's a lot closer. After this, it moves on to just being the level of detail 000, which is the highest level of detail. Just making sure to get the normals in there. This is probably not as necessary, but I found sometimes when the photo scan is being used, adding normals just right before the null will actually help quite a bit. Now it moves into something that would have been great in HDA, but I found that there were so many use cases and quite a bit of Python that I would need to add for some of these tools that I'm just not able to do. So for the time being, and just so that this is all open and in an editable way, there are sliders here that are a lo-fi way of adding controls into the system using a simple just these parameters are copied and the relative references are pasted in other places. So this is just a on-off switch, 0 and 1, 1 being on, 0 being off. And this says that you want to bake texture maps for the try level of details, which in the traditional polygon reduction method that's being used actually retains the UVs from whatever model is being imported. So you technically do not have to do that. It will save about 10 minutes of that baking process if you don't want to do these. The only problem is you are stuck with whatever maps are generated from the photo scan or from this model, and they will not match one-to-one with the quads, which have to have baked maps due to the new mesh and the new UVs. So the baked textures, we can get into that a little bit later down the workflow and show all the ones that you can turn on or off and how to assign different ones, but this is where you can control that. Right now it is turned on. The other thing is inputting a very incorrect way of using a switch, but inputting the max resolution that you want your textures to be exported at. And then this just notes that from level of detail 1 all the way to 4, this max res will be cut in half for each of those. So on and so forth all the way down to level 4, which if we were using this 4K would be a 512. That dramatically decreases the time that the bake takes, and seeing as if you're using a level of detail 4 asset, you're probably very far away from it. So you won't actually be able to see all the 4K detail that's in the texture maps, or at least I noticed when I did comparisons between having 512 by 512 and 4K on the level of detail 4s. You couldn't really tell just due to the distance you were at. The third of these lo-fi kind of updates, lo-fi inputs here, is the highest resolution of the quad level of detail 0. This also notes that from level of detail 1 through 4, it is progressively decreased just based on a good flow that gets down to similarly and matches what's happening in the tri-level of detail. So the level of detail 4's amount of polygons will match quad level of detail 4's polygons roughly. So that's just a way of updating that. So if you want the quads to have more or less, you can update that here as well, and that will propagate against all of the other quad meshes. After that is an optional kind of adjustments that you can add or ways that you can help the quad meshing. The quad mesher node that Labs comes with allows for guide splines, and in this case what will happen is you will take the mesh, and because sometimes the mesh will be from a photo scan and have around upwards of 3 million or so, even higher polygons, it is almost impossible to in the viewport paint any or draw any lines on that. So this just takes it into a poly reduction and reduces it quite a bit. So now we're just left with 10,000 polygons. That allows to, if you just click on this, this is where you can start to draw on the mesh. So if you want a certain flow to the lines that you're not getting, strudel here would be quite hard to actually pick a really clean flow, but if this is an object that is more hard surface or a human, for instance, there are different ways that you want the flow to definitely happen. The node does a really good job on its own, but with this node you can just draw on top and give some guiding splines. And if you are doing something that is hard surface or something that you want to have this mirrored, that's what this first switch is. It's just a way of turning it on. So because the model has been set to world 00, the mirroring will happen in this direction. So you can definitely mess with this node to pick which way you'll be mirroring. But if it's something organic like this, like a strudel, that doesn't apply. It's by default just left off. And also, if these spline guides are not something that you want to use by default, they are not, but you would just click them to 1 to turn this on and 0 to use a blank null. So if we go back up here, we can also go in here and clear that if you want to start again. So this is the highest resolution of your scan, and everything after this will be based off this. So that's kind of why this has all the control in here. You definitely want to, if you're using a photo scan, make sure that everything looks right at this point, because everything after this will be using this as a reference. From here, you could, and the goal is you would just go, you would definitely have to wait for quite a few of the processes to happen. Once you go into just right away to export, there will be quite a few things that happen. So I also advise, if you want to go check out all of these things, to switch your update to manual, just so that you don't have to cancel or escape out of any of the processes. So level of detail 0 is just object merge. It's because it's a lot cleaner this way to have the try and the quad broken up in their naming convention inside of the exporter. And what this exporter will do is when you send this over to your other program, it will recognize it as different level of details and group them and give you that functionality. So inside of Cinema here, for instance, if we go to open the try, it's a single FBX, and it will take a little bit of time for Cinema to import it because it's running through all of the textures that were exported when this was done, all of the different objects, and adding them into Cinema's own level of detail manager, which is its own object that will nest all of these as children and give you all the functionality that you need out of that. And that's kind of where this entire idea was based. So we can see that it gave us this level of detail object manager with the controls here, and ordered all of our objects from highest detail to lowest detail. And it also imported the try level of detail for baked text, and that's for all of these. It also imported the normals, and so all of that's working. And that's kind of the overarching idea of this. You build each level of detail, but they're grouped in this object level here, and it's a single export that will do all of the smart work. So this also came from Labs, so another Labs tool that is super handy. So that now we're in manual, we can kind of go into each of those. Try level of detail is obviously the original scan. Quad level of detail, there are quite a few things just being merged. This is just bringing in the level of detail 0 of the tries. This is what was pointed out at the bottom of the build. This is the guidelines, which we set to 0. So there will be no guidelines coming through, and that just imports there. In the instant mesh, it is referencing the resolution put in the quad resolution on level of detail 0 in the build node. And after this happens, the normals are assigned, but now it needs to have UVs assigned. So there's another Labs Auto UV, which happens, and I found that these two settings work well for most things. They obviously have auto-generated seams, so that may be something that you want to tweak or dive in here and tweak, and this will propagate against all of the others as well. And then those UVs you can also check with the visualize UVs here. After that, it goes into the texture baking section. So this is taking the textures that were put into the level of detail 0 for the tries, so the original scan or the original 3D file, and that is what these are based off, and then feeding in the new quadded mesh into that as well. in here by default is set up just to do diffuse, normal, roughness, thickness, and curvature. I find that those are all that I've needed, but you can obviously go in and add and all these other things. It just will take quite a bit longer the more you add of these. This is also reflecting the max texture resolution that was input in the build section, and this is the tied naming convention to that. It should auto-generate inside the HIP folder. It will make a bake text folder, another folder in there with the name of the HIP file, and then that HIP file name will also be the start of these textures names. It will add in which level of detail and which method, try or quad, and then it will be the channel's name. So that's what this string means if it's a little hard to read that. This is then going to be the name of the material that Cinema 4D creates. Then it just is the same exact naming convention, but instead of now it being a general term for whichever channel is being baked out, you have to then specify which channel is being baked out, just like the original quick material at the beginning. So input all of these that you want to be pulled in, and that's all that needs to be done here. And all of this stuff should just work out of the box. There should be no need to really have to go in here unless there's something you'd like to change, but a lot of this should be able to just be propagated after working inside the build scene and setting up these. And then all you need to go here is go and click export. And that is it for this HIP file. I hope that that helps explain everything. Apologies for it not being a super technical HDA. I also ran into the issue that I'm working currently off Indie, and the Indie has its own limited commercial form of HDA, so it wouldn't be as broadly usable. But in this case, the ideas are laid out, and if this needs to be adapted or changed to a different pipeline that works better for you, or there's different things that you would like to alter or change that help suit your needs better, it's a lot easier to change it just inside of an open HIP file like this. If you have any questions, feel free to comment them below. I'll try my best to answer them. If you like this, you can download it. There will be a link in the description below. You can also leave a like on the video and subscribe for more quick videos like this. And I'll see you in the next one.